Three things happen in the first 5 minutes that make you understand the kind of town you live in. Someone parks like they own the curb. The neighborhood Facebook blows up with petty outrage. And then, one bright Saturday morning, a pair of men in cheap tactical vests and a woman with a clipboard decides they get to decide whether you can leave your own driveway. I was carrying a trash bag, thinking about coffee, when they stepped in front of my truck and announced, loud enough for the whole block to hear, that I was being detained for community violations. That line, detained for community violations, sounded like a joke at first, until one of the men clicked something metal and the world tilted. My name's Alex Rivers. I've been a lot of things in my life: mechanic, landlord, a long stretch doing investigations for a federal agency that taught me how to read people before they finish sentences. But on that morning, I was just a guy who'd lived on Willow Bend for 10 years, known the neighbors, fixed more than one leaky roof, and believed, maybe stubbornly, that people belonged in their own yards unless they agreed otherwise. Willow Bend had an HOA with an appetite for rules and a president with a taste for performance. Evelyn Hartsharp hair, sharper tongue, ran the association like it was her second job and the neighborhood her stage. Nobody ever called her a tyrant out loud, not at the meetings where cookies and shaming mixed, but there were whispers and a few badly flagged letters pushed under doors. I'd seen petty things, passive fines, a banner confiscated for a display violation. I never expected anyone to show up with what looked like handcuffs. Evelyn had friends who liked to make a show. That's what made it dangerous. Authority performed often looks real until someone pushes back. The two men with her weren't cops. They weren't even private security. They were local contractors who'd bought a look at a thrift store and a confidence they didn't earn. One had the kind of jaw you see in action movies and the wallet of a guy who thinks intimidation substitutes for proof. He introduced himself as community compliance, with a smirk. The other kept his face blank, hands at his sides like he was waiting for permission to start trouble. They pointed. Evelyn pointed, perfectly practiced and read from a printout about violations of covenant and common sense. She said my mailbox was 6 inches too tall, my RV was improperly parked 3 springs ago. I had turned my front porch into an accentuated visual nuisance. The neighbors started to gather, curtains twitching, kids' bikes abandoned, phones lifted like small witnesses. I laughed once too short. Too sharp, and asked where a homeowner's right to be in their own driveway was printed on her clipboard. Evelyn smiled, the kind of smile that had banked on silence. We're enforcing community standards, she said. You need to come with us for a quick resolution. That's when the tall contractor clicked the thing at his belt, cheap metal handcuffs with a weighty sound that made 2 people step back and the crowd inhaled. For a second, I saw the block as if through a window. Mrs. Patel with her morning tea frozen halfway to her lips. 2 teenagers leaning against a fence with deadpan excitement. A golden retriever barking like some slow alarm. My chest was a steady, stubborn beat. Anger and an old caution braided together. I thought, not for the first time, about the jobs that taught me how quickly other people's confidence becomes real authority to the ones who want to believe it. I could have walked away. You can walk away from almost anything if you are tired enough, but walking away felt like letting the show become truth. So I stepped forward and kept my voice level. You don't have a legal right to detain me, I said. If you're making threats, you're risking your own freedom. The man laughed, that hollow laugh they all did when they confused menace for leverage. Evelyn's eyes flashed. She lived for being the center of escalation, and she raised her chin like someone starting an old play. Words bent into a shove, and a hand reached. The tall one lunged for my wrist fast, sloppy, and he wanted me to flinch so the crowd would see me as the aggressor. I have been in rooms where the wrong move ends careers, and I have known the grace of calm hands. I didn't flinch. I moved, not with the violence he expected, but with a practiced efficiency that turned his reach into a stumble. The cuff met his forearm, the cuff closed. For a breath, the street held its breath, then the crowd roared with that particular kind of delighted surprise you only get when a bully trips on his own props. That's when I decided not to explain everything. The badge I kept in my glove compartment had more stories than it had use, and I didn't want to make it the centerpiece of a small-town spectacle. But when one of Evelyn's allies pulled out his phone to stream and the tall man tried to make a story out of the struggle, I clipped the cuffs on him and held the weight of his arm until he realized he couldn't make his performance look real anymore. People were filming. Everyone was filming, and the footage is honest in its way. You can see the handcuff, the surprised faces, The way a woman with a clipboard suddenly looked like someone reading off a script rather than giving orders. "Alex, what are you doing?" Mrs. Lawson whispered from a stoop. "You're not." She didn't finish because the next sound was sirens, a clean, undeniable authority that arrives for everyone if you ask it to. Someone had called 911 before the man made his second move. That's the thing. Modern neighborhoods are loud with witnesses. We'd all become witnesses before we realized we were being lied to. The police arrived and did their job with that sterile clarity you love and hate at once. They took statements, they checked IDs, and then they did the slow, inevitable math of who actually had the legal authority to act. The tall man started telling a different story, one where he had no idea he'd staged anything, where he was only helping. Evelyn's eyes lost the sheen of command. Her voice found new tones. Apology, confusion, none of it stuck. The men were detained for impersonation and trespass, and Evelyn was cited for conspiracy to interfere with personal liberty, a good-sounding phrase that tasted like consequences. After the formalities, people gathered on lawns and porches and tried to name what had happened. Some were shocked, others were proud in a small and private way. I walked to my truck and opened the glove compartment. The badge was there, dull in the morning light, and felt the hollow where fear had been. It's strange to describe the relief that isn't triumphant. It's heavier, because you understand both how close the line was and how lucky you were to be the one who noticed it. I'd been trained to look for patterned small lies that lead to big ones, and I'd learned that a neighborhood's peace can be a thin veneer over ambitions. In the days after, the neighborhood meetings took on a different temperature. People who'd never spoken up started asking questions about bylaws and enforcement, about who contracts with whom and why a private citizen would feel entitled to act like a deputy. The group chats filled with links to municipal codes and the county sheriff's number, practical things, not just outrage. Evelyn moved through the block like someone who had mismatched expectations. Neighbors nodded politely, their smiles unavailable. The men who'd put on vests found their reputations followed them. Contractors who bill for work suddenly found their phones quieter. But it wasn't tidy. There are always costs when authority is exposed as fragile. Some neighbors defended Evelyn with a kind of stubborn loyalty, their reasons as human as anything. Fear of change, a debt of favors, the weird comfort of having someone else make rules. A few people sided with the men, saying they were trying to help, that maybe enforcement was needed in a place with so many small violations. Those debates lasted longer than the legal consequences. That's the thing about community. It doesn't prefer simple endings. For me, the story left a scar that felt like clarity. I'd been quiet in meetings. I'd avoided drama. After being shoved to the center of one, I started to notice the things that make a town a town. The balance of power in a homeowners association, the mercenary edges of influence, the way people will perform authority because people are primed to obey it. I began to devote parts of my weekends to decoding the small injustices, reading covenants, talking to neighbors, teaching people that a clipboard does not equal a warrant. It felt minor, and it felt important, because we learned to name things. I also realized how ordinary a hero looks when he's just another neighbor. Hard hands, a skeptical look, a willingness to speak up. That changed how people saw me, which was awkward in its own way. A few neighbors would wave and then ask me to intervene in garden disputes, which I did with as much grace as I could muster. The older kids on the block began nodding like they'd seen something that mattered. When someone asked once if I regretted stepping in, I thought about the man going to cuffs, the woman with the clipboard reduced to a citation, and the small, steady relief in my chest. Regret would be letting them keep pretending. We didn't end the HOA. We didn't start a revolution. What we did was harder way started insisting on transparency. We put questions in writing. We voted on who the association could hire. We demanded records. Those are boring, pedestrian things, and they changed everything in their own slow way. The men who played cop were prosecuted in the small way the law allows for small-town lies. Evelyn did community service and ended up on a different committee where her appetite for performance had less policy impact. The neighborhood remained stubborn and imperfect, and in the evenings the streetlights still came on and the houses still glowed. If there's a single thing I want you to carry from this, it's that authority looks convincing when people want to be told what to do. Costumes and clipboards work until someone points out the seams. You don't need to be a retired investigator to look. You only need to be a neighbor with the guts to call it out. So when you see someone playing it, power someone who dresses the part but can't produce the paperwork notice. Film it if you have to. Speak up if you can. And when you have the floor, use it for the quiet work of checking the books, asking the questions, making sure the people who hold authority actually earned it. Now tell Medone in the comments what you would have done if this happened on your street. Was Evelyn right about keeping order, or did she cross a line that should never be blurred? Share your thoughts. Tell us about a time authority looked real and turned out to be a costume. And if you like this story, share it with someone who needs to know that a clipboard is not a badge.